It's August. Let's see what computer we're building in this month's Budget Builds monthly video.
Before we get into it, I want to give a quick insight as to what we do for this series. We take your budget and answers from a request form. In the video description, there is a link to a Google form. It slowly gets updated every so often. With this information, we try to build the best computer we can to fit your means. Unless there are budget constraints, we spec out systems on AMD and Intel, both using their DDR4 and DDR5 Gen platforms. Once the build lists are complete, we compare each build using online benchmarks and list out the pros and cons between the top builds from the benchmarks. Using those, then we can determine what build is the best for your use case. But we can't do any of that without your input. Speaking of the Google form, let's see how you fill it out.
I made some changes to the Google form since last time, so just in case you forgot or you're new to the channel, here's how we fill out the Budget Builds request form. Now, Budget Builds do not include taxes, fees, or Windows keys, unless stated otherwise. We do not collect your Google information, just don't worry about that, you don't have to sign in. Budgets are in USD. Now you can select your type of system, whether you want gaming, working, or a combination of the two. Form factor preferences, this will determine what case we go with. So if you go for a mini ITX, then we'll go with a mini ITX case, or if you go for ATX, then we'll go for at least an ATX case. Now you can let us know down in the comments at the end of this if you want a mini ITX board within full ATX case, but we'll get there when we get there. Next up is CPU and GPU preferences. If you want an Intel CPU, AMD CPU, NVIDIA GPU, AMD GPU, other preferences, or no preference at all. Now here's your area of focus. Now these are in hierarchical format. So if you want us to focus on your CPU first, I would put focus first here, and then second, third, all the way to focus last. So if we have any money left over in your budget, or we can shift things around, we'll start in this order and work our way to the end. Now, if you don't care about anything like your case or your power supply or things like that, or your memory, you can either put these at the end or just say focus last, and we'll move on from there. Now, if you already purchased or own any system components you want to use in this next system, just put them in the format of, let's say, storage, 500 gigabyte, and then if it's an M.2 SSD, a SATA SSD, whatever it is, there's no sense in buying two cases or a double power supply if you already have it. Now, any peripherals you want, a mouse, keyboard, a monitor, headset, or pretty much anything you want, just put here in this other category or just select it and we'll add it into the build. Now, any other request you can put here, like if you want RGB, no RGB, again, any other request, just put in this bottom here.
Quick disclaimer, prices will vary if any sales are going on or stock changes at the time of recording. Because of this, we tried to get the budget builds as close or slightly over the stated budget. Unless asked, we are not including taxes, shipping costs, OS keys, or peripherals in the final cost from the budget.
Now, staying on track with the in-order responses, I know this says August of 2024, but this is actually still the same response that we saw actually a couple months back. So this is the build we're going to do. Again, just wanted to finish that in order of our responses before we move on to the next one. With a budget of $600 USD, the user wants a combination of a working gaming system, no form factor preference, no GPU preference, and then just didn't select anything else in this request form. So this pretty much just means we're going to build a working gaming system for 600 bucks. So what we'll do is we'll take 600 bucks, we'll try the AM4 and the Intel platform for DDR4, test those out. We'll do the DDR5 platforms, test those out. And then we'll take a look at some pre-builds, see what we can get with that, test those against our builds. And then we'll actually take a look at the used market and finalize this out. Now, 600 bucks is a tight budget, especially since you want to do both gaming and working. So finding a graphics card used might be the way we got to go. But unfortunately, there isn't a lot in this Google form we can go off of. Like, there's no areas of focus or purchase system components or pretty much anything else. But yeah, we're going to start those out and see what kind of systems we can build. Here's the user's $600 budget template just to start with our DDR4 platform. Because they're gaming and they're working, we went with at least a 16 gigabyte kit. For storage, we went with at least a 128 gigabyte SSD. You can go for a hard drive, but I'd rather get the SSD to start with and then upgrade from there. Went with whatever cheap case we could get just to fill that void. And then for power supply, we went with an EVGA 750 watt bronze. Now, you don't need a 750 watt power supply, but we went with something with at least a bronze certification. We might end up dropping this down later on. So starting with our DDR4, we're going to start with our AM4 and see what we got. So here's our AM4 build. We're just going to list everything through and then some pros and cons. First up, we have our Ryzen 5 5600X. It's a 6-core, 12-thread, 3.7 GHz boosting to 4.6. For our motherboard, we went with the ASRock B450M. Now, I don't think this is a Wi-Fi motherboard, which you kind of lose out a little bit there, but later on you can add it through its PCIe slot. And then we have that silicon powered DDR4 3200 CL16 kit. Again, 16GB kit, perfectly fine. We're only limited to a 128GB SSD from Silicon Power. Maybe later on the user will have some more money to put more storage, but this will limit them now. For our graphics card, we went with a PNY Verto RTX 3060. This is the 8GB version of the card. And then we went with whatever case we could find, and then EVGA 650 watt ATX power supply. The only bad thing about this one is we lose out on no gold power supply and a limited run for storage. Now, if we switch out our NVIDIA graphics card for an AMD graphics card, we still have that Ryzen 5 5600X, that same ASRock motherboard, that same set for our memory. And then for storage, we were able to bump this thing up to a 512GB from Silicon Power for our SSD and add a 2TB hard drive just for that extra storage. And then for our graphics card, we went with an RX 6650 XT, which is rivaling the RTX 3060. We will do tests later on. And then we were able to bump it up back to that 750 watt bronze from EVGA. Now, if you look at our budget, unlike the previous one, this one we still have a few dollars to spring, which you can't really get another motherboard. If you were to go a little bit over budget, this would bring it to, let's say, 602 and get a better motherboard, but this one's actually perfectly fine. If we move on to our Intel builds, went with an i5-8400. It's a 6-core, 6-thread, 2.8 GHz boosting to 4.0. So it is a little bit on the lower base clock for speeds. For a motherboard, we went with the ASRock H310CM. This is a micro ATX motherboard on the LGA 1151 platform. So it's a bit odd in the architecture can fit though, but don't worry, this thing is actually perfectly fine for our CPU. The only unfortunate thing is I don't think this thing has Wi-Fi as well, but just like other builds, we still have that same memory, storage, video card case, and that 750 watt bronze power supply, all for $598. So we still are sitting a little bit under budget with this build compared to our NVIDIA AM4 build, but this one compared to that one actually has a 512GB SSD. Moving on to our AMD version of this Intel build, everything pretty much stays the same. We were able to add a 2TB hard drive, and we're sitting $29 under that budget, which is very, very good because it leaves the user in a spot that they can actually move some money around, get a better motherboard, things like that. All right, with all of that laid out, we are going to do some testing between our CPUs and then our graphics cards, and then we're going to see if we can actually build out some DDR5 builds. So let's get into testing and see where we can go. All right, since technically we're only comparing two sets of CPUs to two sets of graphics cards, here's our AM4 and our Intel DDR4 build. Now, our Ryzen 5 5600X is almost 60% better than our i5-8400. So we're just gonna get rid of this and go with our Ryzen 5 5600 build. All right, with that out of the way, we're going to go test our GPUs, just comparing that 6650 XT with our RTX 3060.
If she was up to the task, why'd she drop you off on us?
Well, maybe she's better now.
Kid, I don't mean to upset you, but your friend's chances of survival weren't too high to begin with.
She's a lot tougher than you think.
It don't matter. Because I doubt I can get either one of us back into the city in one piece. An honest day.
I simply.
Alright, I feel like on average our RX 6650 XT isn't a lot better than our RTX 3060. And remember, this is the 12 gig. We only have the 8 gigabyte card on our builds. Alright, and moving on to our DDR5 platform. Now, $600 is kind of a stretch when it comes to building this next gen platform, but we always want to check this out. So unlike before, I just didn't add a RAM component here for our template, but everything pretty much stays the same. We need an SSD, basic case, and a good power supply. Starting out with our AM5. And then here's our AM5 platform with the Ryzen 5 8400F. It's a 6-core, 12-thread, 4.2 GHz boosting to 4.7. We're with the A620M. Now, I don't think this thing has Wi-Fi again, but we could probably move some of our money around and probably get a better board if it's viable. For our RAM, we're with a 16GB kit of DDR5 4800 CL40 from Team Group. This is a bit on the slower side, especially for our AMD CPU, but we're in a limited budget here. For our storage, we bumped it up to a 512GB SSD from Silicon Power again. And then we went with that RX 6650 XT from Speedster. Same case and that 750 watt bronze power supply, sitting at right around 592. So if we drop the storage down, we could probably get a better set of RAM, even a different motherboard. But just once again, you know, you don't want to be buying a motherboard now and then down the line, you'd rather spend that money for... I wasn't able to get an NVIDIA card for this, but we'll just move on to our Intel build and see what we got from there. So let's just check that out before we get back into testing. For our Intel DDR5 build, went with an i5 13400F. It's a 10-core, 16-thread, 2.5 GHz boosting to 4.6. For motherboard, went with the ASRock H610M, another micro ATX LGA 1700 motherboard this time. It seems like a lot of these cheaper boards are micro ATX for the newer gen and then not for the older gen, but it's kind of weird. And then everything pretty much stays the same from our AM5 build, same memory, storage, video card case, and power supply. Everything pretty much stays the same in the same set of circumstances. But unfortunately, this one goes over our budget. And here we're testing out our DDR5 CPU comparison, as well as keeping our DDR4 winner here to the left. So if we're just comparing our AMD CPU and our Intel CPU, we can see that it's about a 2.5% difference in CPU score. Of course, the i5 13400F uses a 148 watt TDP, while the Ryzen 5 8400F uses a 65 watt TDP. But because the user is going for a working and gaming combination system, probably better off with the more cores and threads, as you can do a lot more with that than just the 6 cores and 12 threads that the AMD CPU running. So this is going to show us that if you want a DDR4 build with our AMD system, I would go for this one, our Ryzen 5 5600X. And then if you want a DDR5 build going with an Intel system, I would go for the i5 13400F. Now, the only real difference between the DDR5 and the DDR4 build is the 2TB hard drive that we have on our DDR4 build. So if that's the case, I would actually go for this one, the i5 13400F with our 512GB SSD, and then you can later on get more storage. Now, I know you're probably not going to be able to get a RTX 3060, 3070, or even a 3080 for $189, the price of the RX 6650 XT. But what I wanted to do is I want to take a look at some pre-builds and then some used components and see what we can do with that. The other day, I received a very interesting comment about our Budget Builds Monthly series, and it got me thinking that I should actually start looking into this. The comment pretty much just said that I should be looking at any current deals going on with parts like Micro Center or Newegg, and then actually use those components if I can in these Budget Builds Monthly videos for the builds, as it will actually bring the user to more attention and actually give them better parts overall. So we're going to take this
and we're gonna hop over to Micro Center and see what kind of deals we got. So here on Micro Center's website, we're gonna scroll down and we're gonna first hit AMD, and then we'll check out some Intel bundles and then put that into our builds. So here we have some AMD bundle combos. We can get a Ryzen 5 7600X, a B650M, and a 16GB kit of DDR5 for $299.99, a Ryzen 7 7700X for $420, and then so forth, going up to $500, $1259, and so forth. Here we have our Ryzen 5 5600X, our ASRock B450M, and a 16GB kit of DDR4 3200 from Silicon Power for right around $210. If we hop over to Micro Center, there's nothing in our $210 budget to just swap out for a combo. Now, if we hop over to DDR5, we have a Ryzen 5 8400F, an MSI Pro 620M, and a 16GB kit from Team Group for $290. Now, since we do have 10 hours left in our budget, if we hop over to Micro Center, we can actually pick up this Ryzen 5 7600X, a B650M, and a 16GB kit of DDR5. And if we quickly compare our Micro Center Ryzen 5 7600X bundle versus our PC part picker Ryzen 5 8400F, I would go for the bundle that's on Micro Center. So let's pick that one and then continue on to what we have next and check out our Intel chips. Now, if we hop over to Intel, we can get a i5 12600KF, a Z790P Pro, and a 16GB kit of DDR4 for $259.99, $299.99 for a 12700K, and then $420 for an i9 12900K and DDR5. Now we're going to take these CPUs, we're going to take a look at our budgets again just to make sure that our budgets actually coincide with these combos, and then we'll go from there. Just a quick reminder, we have an i5 8400, an H310CM, and a 16GB kit of DDR4, which is $204 for our CPU, motherboard, and memory, which is actually, will be nice and say $56 under this bundle. Now, I would actually highly recommend taking that and actually buying this bundle, since you're better off replacing your CPU, motherboard, and RAM for a super great deal, and you can actually drop this 2TB hard drive, and that will actually give you a really good deal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our Intel CPU from our DDR4 build, as well as our Intel CPU from our DDR5 build, and we're going to compare them with our 12600KF, a 12700K, and a 12900K, because at the end we could always just get one of these CPUs used. Just a quick reminder, for our DDR5 build, we went with the 16GB kit from Team Group, an H610M motherboard, and a 13400F for $303, which actually brings us to the i7 12700K. Now, we may be able to use that 12700K with a DDR5 build, but because this bundle is a 12700K with DDR4, you would be limited to that DDR4, and it's kind of a bit interesting for upgradability down the line, as you'd have to replace the motherboard as well as the RAM. Even though Micro Center gives you this build with it button, you can't actually change out most of the components. It will actually go over the allotted amount. You can kind of mix and match your RAM and your motherboard, but they give you only specific ones you can actually choose from when swapping them out for the bundled items. So with all that out of the way, we're actually going to go take all of our CPU components, compare them, and then see where that leaves us for our bundle deals. So here I have a 13400F, a 8400, 12600KF, and our i9 12900K. Now here's the DDR4 CPU, here's our DDR5 CPU, and then here's the two bundle deals I was actually taking a look at. So straight out of the gate, I would go for this DDR5 i5 13400F, because there is only a 2000 score difference between the i5 13400F and the 12600KF, and the 12600KF is on the DDR4 platform, while our 13400F is on the DDR5. And then if we were going to take a look at something used, I'd go for that 12900K used, because we're getting 16 cores, 24 threads, and we can still stay on that DDR5 platform. Again, this was a good avenue to take a look at, It's always best to take a look at any bundle deals going on, as well as any other deals from like Walmart or Newegg or any of these other sites, because they actually give you some good random deals of the week, and it can actually make or break your system. But thank you again, user, for suggesting it.
Let's check out some pre-builds. Alright, so I've been shopping around for some pre-builds on sites like Origin, Newegg, Best Buy. And on sites like Origin, you're not able to get like a cheaper style gaming computer. If you hop on this CLX website, you're able to get something, but it's starting at $650 and you only get like Vega graphics for onboard. It's not that good. Even if we cut to something like Best Buy for $650, you're able to get an i5 12100F and 16 gigabytes with a GTX 1650. So again, you're not there. Even if you bump it up, this is onboard graphics. You're better off just building your own system for that $600. So yeah, there was one last thing I wanted to check out, and that was going on eBay to see if we can get any used components to save some money. I don't know what we're gonna find, but why don't we just take a look and see what we can find. All right, so here I have our Intel build list out for DDR5. We're going to be using these numbers, like $169.99 for our CPU. So hopping over to eBay, we can get an i9-12900K for $152. Now this is only parts, so if we scroll down to the next one, here we go. $169 for a 12900K, 16 cores, 24 threads, which is perfect. So that means for the same price, we can get a 16 core processor, which is actually really, really good. So now that we found a i9-12900K, you can also look into like other motherboards and things. This I would still get new no matter what. Shifting around to find better DDR5 RAM, we can take a look at real quick. For $65, we can get, I think, a single stick of 16 gigabyte DDR5 Dominator Platinum. That is kind of out of our budget, but you can hop on the used market and see what kind of used components are out there, even if they're open box. But I would definitely go with a brand new motherboard, a brand new power supply, a used graphics card you can go for. So like a 6650 XT. How about a 6700 XT? 250, 255. So yes, this is out of our budget. And if we bring it down to a 6650 XT, seems like they're going for $200, so around the same price that you can get a brand new one for. Before we choose the winner, I wanted to bring up our used CPU, our i5-13400F from our Intel DDR5 build, and our Ryzen 5 7600X from our bundled DDR5 AMD build. So if you're going to go with a used CPU, of course you want to go for that Intel build that we have, but using that i9-12900K. And then if you're going to grab that bundled deal, I would go for the Ryzen 5 7600X. Which in turn makes this our clear winner. Of course, if you don't want to go single channel RAM, you may be able to switch it out on the website. But if you wanted to do a bundle deal, go for this Ryzen 5 7600X. And then if you're going to go used, I would go for the Intel build. Again, these are both winners. But yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell notification, fill out our Google form, and we'll see you all in the next one.